Good morning. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Rare Patient Advocacy Summit. Yeah, right? So I actually couldn't be here yesterday, but I heard it was a good day. Were any of you inspired? Yes? Yes? Good. And you woke up and you're energized and ready to do it all over again today? Yes, yes, all over again today? Good. I want to thank you to Amicus for providing this morning's breakfast and to get everyone ready to tackle day 2. So first I want to tell you just a little bit about why I'm here. My background is in technology, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. When my 3rd child was born, it was clear something wasn't right. And at one point, after an MRI revealed she had no patella, I was told that she might walk, but she probably would never climb stairs. And that was a pivotal moment for me. I became a parent activist. I changed the focus of my company to focus solely on rare disease. Of course, I have a huge personal commitment to working with life-changing therapies, but also I believe that innovation happens at the edges, and that's another piece of what drives me. And like many of us in the room, when you're pushed to the wall, you use everything with your time, talent, and treasure to solve problems. Problems that if there's no solution, you have to innovate. And I think that's why you see so much innovation happening with all of us together in the room. So my daughter Casey, she's 16 now, and she walks with a cane, which she has named Bill Withers. That's for, he wrote the song Lean on Me. Sometimes she sings. Okay, so I want to remind everybody, if you haven't done it already, to download the mobile app. In fact, how is everybody liking the mobile app? Yeah, you like it? Good. If you haven't been checking it regularly, do be sure to look at it today. Now, I also have to say that due to the hurricanes and some health issues, we've had to cancel 2 sessions this afternoon, and those changes have been reflected in the mobile app, but you need to check the updates in case you missed them. Okay, now let's see how this works. We're going to challenge ourselves with a live poll, which is in the app. So here's how you do it. You go to, you open your mobile app, you go to the agenda, which is the top, you go to the top right corner and hit on the agenda, and then click on the welcome. People with me? You guys all doing that? And then it says that you'll scroll down a little bit, and right under my name, Wendy White, it says live poll. So if you click on that, the question is, have you participated in any of the exhibitor activities? For example, PRA Health Sciences Puzzle Project or the Say 5 Rare Disease Challenge. So then you can select yes or no, and it will show up behind me. And hit finish, and then exit poll. You guys are going to show this up here, right? We're going to show it up here. There it is. Look at that. So it looks like it's like a baseball thing, right? They're racing. So that's good. Looks like around 57% of the people have participated. That's fantastic. And look at how technology savvy we are. Look, using that poll. That's fantastic. Okay. You're having trouble? Never mind, you got it to work? Angie, what's the Wi-Fi? It's Hotel Irvine Meeting. The username is Global Genes. And the password is Genes. Oh, sorry, and the password's Genentech. How about that? And it's on the back of your ID. So, there you go. Yeah, that's all right. No problem. All right, so we're going to start today with a fireside chat about the critical role of patients in moving research from the lab into the clinic. Dr. Christopher Austin, Director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, which is part of the NIH, and John Crowley, CEO of Amicus Therapeutics, and also a Global Genes board member and a Pompe disease parent activist, will discuss the need for patient partnerships and translational research and what this can mean for the rare disease community. So if you guys want to come on up and start the fireside chat, that would be fantastic. John Crowley and Chris Austin.
Step up.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Wendy, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Nicole and I this morning were just commenting on how far these meetings and this conference has come, and it's so great. I wasn't able to be here last year, and to be able to see just the growth in even a year or two is just remarkable. And thank you for the opportunity to facilitate this fireside chat. And as Wendy indicated, I run a biotech company called Amicus Therapeutics, and when people ask me what we do, I say we make medicines for people living with rare diseases. And that's a pretty broad statement and certainly a pretty lofty goal. And I am also, as Wendy indicated, the father of 2 children with a rare genetic disease, Megan, who is 20, and Patrick, who is now 19, who live with Pompe disease. We also do have a 22-year-old, John, who is a sophomore in college. John does not have a rare disease, but John does live with Asperger's. And I had a chance last night to FaceTime with John, and he asked me, "What are you doing, Dad?" And everything's very binary with John, black and white. And I said, "I'm out here in California." He said, "Oh, great, Dad. With whom?" So I described we're with whom. "What are you doing?" I said, "Well," I described some of the activities and events. I said, "And actually tomorrow morning, in front of the whole crowd who's at the conference, with a very world-renowned researcher and somebody dedicated to rare diseases, a Dr. Chris Austin, I get to host a fireside chat." Now, when you have Asperger's and you take everything literally, and he said, "Dad, what are you doing that for? It's too hot in California for a fire."
True story.
Oh, that's it. There are many truths. I am writing a book about John's views on life. So, Chris, it's great to be here with you, and we've got kind of a broad topic to talk about the involvement of patients, patient advocacy in drug development in this field and this noble quest of making medicines. Lots to talk about this morning. You run a center at the National Institutes of Health called NCATS, and I want to get to that, and we'll talk about what role that plays. But talk a little bit about how you came to it. I mean, a remarkable background, running research and development focused on schizophrenia at Merck, Harvard-trained physician, so you understand how the drug development works in industry, in academia. Tell us a little bit more about you and how you came to this role.
Yeah. Well, thanks, and it's great to be here with you all. I was reflecting with Nicole that the last time I was out here at one of these with her was probably 7 or 8 years ago, when all of this was quite nascent, and it's just wonderful to be able to get out here. I've been trying to get out here for this meeting every year since then, and this is the first time I've succeeded, so it's great to be here. The answer to your question is very important, and you know, as Wendy was saying, and as you related in your story, we all have stories for why we do what we do. In my example, it was in my training as a clinical neurologist, taking care of patients with ALS. And one particular evening I was on call, and a person with late-stage ALS came in. He had actually had lost all amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, and he had lost virtually all muscular activity, and was at home and just wanted to be left there. And he was found and brought into the hospital against his wishes, and brought into the hospital, put on a ventilator, and then asked to be taken off the ventilator. And it was my job to sit in the ICU with him for 3 hours while he died. And as I sat there, and he progressively got weaker and weaker and weaker and finally died, I just thought, there has got to be a better way. I cannot do this for my entire career. I can't just watch this happen. I've got to do something. And I think that is in common with all of you, John. I know that was your experience as well. And what I then embarked on was a journey probably not dissimilar from some of you, though I had come from a science background and a medical background. I really didn't know how new therapeutics were developed. So that's how I ended up at Merck, to learn that. And then after being there for a while, it's a wonderful, wonderful time there, wonderful people, great science. I ran into another thing that all of you know, and John, you know firsthand, which is that the economics of the drug development business mean that up until relatively recently, and still now, the economics of rare diseases therapeutic development is not terribly conducive to a lot of activity in this space. So that's actually why I left Merck and went to NIH. And I had the opportunity to go to NIH right when the Genome Project was being finished about 15 years ago. And it was a singular moment in time. If we think back to that, if those of you who were there at the time, for the first time in the history of mankind, we had the instruction book of how all of us are put together. That's all of our genes and how they're all organized inside each of us. And it was my job, I got hired by Francis Collins to, as he said, figure out what to do with the genome now that we have it.
I do want to ask you the question a little later in the discussion, what do we do with the human genome?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and actually out of that came NCATS eventually, 15 years later. And the question was really going back to that experience that night with the ALS patient. You know, we know so much in fundamental research these days, but we can often do so little for the patients who are living with diseases where that basic research, that process has gone wrong for some reason. And it's been my career quest to figure out, why is that? Why do we have this paradox? On the one hand, we know more about ourselves and health and disease than we ever have, and on the other hand, 95% of rare diseases aren't treatable. And I did a calculation a few years ago. At the current rate of diseases becoming treatable with a regulatorily approved intervention, it will be 2,000 years before every rare disease is treatable.
So Chris, let me step back with that background and your remarkable experience to lead this effort at this important center at the NIH. And you know, this story you just relayed was obviously very personal, more so than it was even professional, with the gentleman who died from ALS.
Yeah.
When I think of, you know, all of us in the rare disease community, oftentimes it begins with something unexpected.
Yep.
None of us planned to
Yes.
live in the
Yep.
world of rare diseases. I certainly didn't.
Yep.
Nature, somebody once told me, nature is not cruel, it's just brutally random.
Yeah.
You know, you look at Wendy's story, I mean, you know, you go the litany of probably most all of us in the room, it almost always begins with a patient at the center.
Yep.
Somebody living with a disease, in our cases, with rare diseases.
Yep.
And it begins with a patient or a parent coming to a researcher somewhere
Yep.
in the world with a handful of words, you know, 4 words maybe, we have a problem.
Yeah.
And a researcher starting with the idea,
Yeah.
we have an idea.
Yeah.
Or with the notion, we have an idea. And I've heard it described this, so now you need to you have to go from diagnosis to an approved medicine, maybe someday for most or all of these diseases, a cure. We're a long way from that.
Yeah.
And I've heard it described, a friend of mine, Dick Gephardt, who is for a long time, I'm sure you know Dick, was the Democratic House leader, real champion of innovation, medical research, and very personal connection with his younger son, who's now, Matt's probably in his 40s, almost dying from a cancer as a child. So it's been a real personal passion. And Dick has described this world that we live in of making medicines as a virtuous circle, with the patient at the center of it. And on that circle, you have early stage academic research, you have the NIH, you have the FDA, you have entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, consultants, patient organizations, bankers, everything that it takes to come together to make a medicine, and in those rare instances when it works and you run the full circle, you get back to the top of the circle and you realize, rarely have you developed a cure. You've usually, hopefully, advanced science, provided some relief, provided a meaningful treatment, and then you go back to it until there is a cure. But a really important part of that circle is basic research into translational medicine. So you work at the NIH.
Right.
We may all have a different view of what is the NIH. What you see this massive campus in Bethesda across from the Naval Medical Center where I used to go get treated sometimes. What is it? Because it's a lot more than a campus in Bethesda. What's your view of what is the NIH?
Yeah, so the NIH is the world's leading biomedical research agency. It has about a $32 billion a year budget that comes from all of you. Thank you. And its role is to support and fund research, basic and clinical research, really for two reasons. One is to understand the nature of living things in their normal state, mainly humans, but also animals to some degree, and figure out why, when they go wrong, why do they go wrong? So how do normal bodies work? How do normal organs work? And then when they go wrong, why do they go wrong? But from the beginning, the idea has been that if we understood that, that would be a basis for intervening to reverse those conditions. So there's really been a two-part mission from the very beginning. The NIH has a campus in Bethesda, which John's been to many times. About 10% of the budget is spent there with researchers on the Bethesda campus, including the clinical center. Of those of you who saw the Discovery series that was just a few weeks ago on the Discovery Channel, you know what I'm talking about, big research hospital. About 85% of the budget goes out to every academic institution virtually in the country. Every medical school and university that does medical research is supported by the NIH. Virtually every medical advance that happens in this country is funded in one way or another by the NIH. So it's a large funding agency as well as a research performing agency. Its complexity comes from the fact that it is, for better or worse, organized a bit like our healthcare system is. That is, that particularly if you have a rare disease, that you have disorders of multiple different organs. And, oh, by the way, you're all the same person. But you have to go to a brain doctor and a heart doctor and an eye doctor and a nose doctor and a skin doctor, and they're all in different offices, and they may not talk to each other, and they may not realize they're all working on the same person. Well, we have the same problem at NIH.
How many institutes at NIH?
Because there's 27 institutes.
Right.
And they pretty much follow those medical specialties that I told you about. And that there's real advantage in that because you have depth of knowledge, but it means that particularly if you're a rare disease patient, where do you go? It's one of the reasons why rare diseases are a particular interest at our place at NCATS, because we're an integrative institute. We really think or perpendicular to everybody else. Instead of what's different about diseases, we think about what's common about diseases, what holds them together. And rather than thinking about different organs, we think about the whole system put together.
So I want to come to NCATS now. So you've got the NIH, you've got 27 institutes largely aligned around areas of biology or therapeutic focus. And then you hear oftentimes we'll go out into our amazing academic research centers, which really are our great competitive strategic advantage in this country at basic research. Most basic research discoveries, in my view, happen in our academic centers.
They do.
Very important part on that virtuous circle. And the NIH, as you indicated, funded because I think that's a big misconception that there's thousands of scientists at a campus in Bethesda and $32 billion goes there.
Oh, no.
And that's not the case. Most of it, 95% of it goes out elsewhere to research universities, institutes in the United States within these NIH grants. Talk just a little bit more, and then I want to come to NCATS, about the grant process. So often, we as advocates or people working in the rare disease field will work with researchers and they talk about their NIH grants, their NIH funding,
Yeah.
and they've got this program, that program, and frankly, it's never enough.
Yes.
So
right. Yeah.
How do we think about those grants programs in this ecosystem?
Yeah. So NIH has a grant program. It's kind of a funny term, but what it means is a support mechanism to help a researcher follow a line of research that he or she thinks it has scientific value or medical value. Most NIH grants actually come from are unsolicited, so-called. That is, a researcher at UC Irvine, for instance, will have an idea, and they will write that idea up. I think this is an area of research and a disease or what have you that is worth doing, and they will write that idea up and send it off to the NIH. The NIH then reads it. There's a place of NIH that's called receipt and referral. Gets this thing, reads it over, and says, which of the 27 institutes is this most relevant to? And then they send it to that division, so it gets channeled in the correct direction. What that means is, and the important thing about that is, that it allows for ideas to come from anywhere. That is, the ideas don't have to come from smart people in some committee someplace. If you have an assistant professor or a graduate student at a university someplace and they have an idea, they can submit that idea and get funded for it. Now, what you also said is true, is that the NIH budget has, until the last couple of years, has really stagnated over the last, decade and a half. Lost about 20% of its purchasing power up until the last 3 years, where that's been reversed. So the success of investigators at universities getting those grants has been cut essentially in half. The traditional rate when I was in training was around 30%. You send in an application and you have about a 30% chance of getting funded. That's pretty good. Now it's more like 15%. And it's clear that there are many, many, many ideas, good ideas, that cannot be funded because there just isn't, there are too many good ideas, too many needs, and not enough money. So yes, researchers, you will always hear saying that they have to keep their labs going. They have to, because that's where their equipment comes from. Those of you who run businesses, imagine you're always thinking, well, gosh, you have to produce a product that brings in revenue. That's exactly how they're thinking. They are entrepreneurs who have space and support at their university, but really they have to raise their own money. And that's why they're constantly talking about needing to do that, much like an owner of a business would.
So let's come to NCATS.
Yeah.
So the program that you run at the NIH is a unique program within the NIH, and it fills a real gap in terms of this goal that we all have of identifying rare diseases, identifying patients with the rare diseases, and doing everything we can to create an environment to foster research, development, and ultimately make medicines. So NCATS, how'd the idea come up, and what's the basic structure and
it's a great question, and it actually relates to the virtuous circle that you started with. That I completely agree, that's right. But you also said, most of the time that virtuous circle actually doesn't complete itself.
Very rarely.
Very rarely. That's the problem that NCATS was formed to solve, to make it happen much more regularly, much more rapidly, much more efficiently. And so we work on the science of that process. It's never been looked at like this before. Nobody's ever looked at that process as a scientific problem, which it really is. So scientists are constantly dealing with, okay, you have a problem, you have something that you'd like to work a certain way, whether it's curing a disease or building a bridge, and to say, okay, if it doesn't work, how do I make it work? Okay, so you have an idea and you try it out, and if it works, great, you keep going. If it doesn't, you try something else. That's what science is like. And so we're approaching this virtuous circle in the same way. The observation is it fails 90-odd% of the time, and even when it does, it's very expensive and inefficient. But that is not a preordained result. There's no reason it should be that way. But there has never been a part of the ecosystem, the research ecosystem, whose job it was to solve that problem. Everybody else is working on one little piece of it, right? So there are the patient groups, there's the companies, there's the basic researchers, there's the clinical researchers, there's the FDA. Each of them is working on an individual disease. So the whole problem, the engineering problem, has never been anybody's day job.
And Cross, how broad is the mandate? If we
It's
look even
very
just
broad.
within rare diseases, 7,000, we all know the number.
Yes.
So how do you focus?
That's a great question. It's very broad because the way we define translation is going everything from the idea all the way to making the intervention, the drug, the device, whatever it might be, getting it through regulatory approval if that's necessary, but importantly, getting it to the people who need it and demonstrating that intervention that you had this idea of way back here actually did what you thought it was going to do. Because if you don't get to the patient, you don't show it's benefited, you failed. And so that's a very broad mission, and we have all 7,000 diseases. So the way we think about projects, with our 2.5% of the NIH budget, so we're a very small part of the NIH, we can't possibly work on all of those at the same time. So there's two fundamental things that we do that are different from everybody else, and we've designed it this way. The first is everything we do is a collaboration. Everything. Every single project. We don't do anything by ourselves.
When you say collaboration,
Yeah.
Collaborate with whom?
It depends on what we're trying to do. So many times it's with patient groups, with companies, with the FDA, certainly with researchers, but all kinds of researchers, but different kinds of researchers. So let's say we're doing a project on a particular stage of a particular disease. Then we have a lot of expertise in the translational space. That is, how do you make a drug, for instance, which is not very well known in most academic settings. They're basic researchers, and that's great. But rather than having our people have to learn all of this about the disease, we form joint project teams. The people who are at NCATS who know translation, know drug development, know regulatory, but they don't know anything about the disease, bring in the person who knows everything about the disease but nothing about translation, put them on a joint project team, give them milestones, go-no-go decisions, and a budget that keeps going until the project fails. That's a very, very different model than the grant model that I just gave you. Now, it's not that the grant model is bad for fundamental research. That's where I started. It's great for basic research, but it doesn't work in translation. So that's the first thing. The second is that every project we take on because we think it's a demonstration project for a better way of getting through some part of that virtuous circle. So we'll have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is, in this case, do we have a better way of predicting if we put a new drug in a person that it will be safe and effective? Because as you all know probably, that's a big failure point going from animals to people. So we have better technology, we think, but we got to try it out in something. And we'll pick a disease. But unlike other parts of NIH, who will pick a disease because it's in their disease area, we pick it because we think it's a good demonstration case for a novel technology. And it could be eczema, it could be Alzheimer's disease, it could be Pompe disease, it could be anything. It doesn't matter to us as long as it's not treatable. And we don't have to go very far. This is the part that kills us every day, is you all know that 95% of diseases are not treatable, and 95% of targets out there have not been addressed. People tend to look under the lamppost, so we always pick projects which are not only novel ways of doing something, but the application has to be for a disease or a target that nobody's ever looked at before.
So, Chris, I remember years ago when we met in Maryland and we talked about what are the needs, where is it? And we described together this valley of death.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Where, so, you know, a venture capital firm may be very excited about certain technologies. You know, gene editing may be hot today.
Yes.
A lot of gene editing programs. I want to come to your view on gene editing in a moment, but they may get funded. Some disease areas, thankfully, a disease like a Duchenne muscular dystrophy, more private dollars flowing to it, which is a good thing. But there are some diseases, either because they're too small or technologies that are really not understood or viewed as too early, that don't get any funding. You know, take the disease that affects 50 kids in the world. Really, really hard for we in industry to be able to say there's any rationale to devote financial resources to that, as difficult as that may be. We're doing much better. We've gone from diseases that were hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands to thousands now, generally into the hundreds. We can devise a model that will work. But for many of the diseases, it doesn't work. So it gets you to that, what we'd call that valley of death, where nobody wants to invest. You may have some good, maybe some great publications, early science, but to take it to preclinical proof of concept, or in some cases taking it all the way to IND ready, or even past that, where there's proof of concept in a patient before a drug developer, a company, an innovator will pick it up. That's where the NIH and now your center can play a critical role. How do you view that today? It's probably 10 years after we had that conversation.
And you all should know, I'm going to give John some credit here. What John's referring to is in our planning for a program that is now called the Therapeutics for Rare and Neglected Diseases program. John was one of the people who were part of this brain trust that we had come into Bethesda to help us think about how to do this. And that program has just been off-scale successful. And if any of you come to the little talk I'm giving in a later session, I'll talk about one of them. And it is interesting. You reminded me of something that is interesting to reflect on how much things have changed in the last 20 years. So we all are impatient people by nature, I'm sure, but it is important to keep track of how much things have changed. And the anecdote is, when I was at Merck, and this was probably in the late 90s, so less than 20 years ago, I was working on a project for congestive heart failure, which affects about 500,000 people every year, major cause of morbidity and mortality. The project was stopped because it was not common enough.
Congestive heart failure was not common enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was my reaction.
Okay.
But so realize how much things have changed. They really have. We're not there yet.
Ultragenics has a program for MPS 7,
exactly.
which is awesome. Yes.
Exactly. So we are making headway. There's no doubt about it. But to understand this, we have to think about all of this in terms of risk. So if you are in business, no matter how well-meaning you are, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to not waste their money. What that means is you can't gamble with the money that they have given you. And if you do, you get in trouble. You don't
understand the biotech model. But
right, exactly, right.
But, smart risks. We take smart risks.
Right. Yes. So you're of course willing to take some risks. That's what entrepreneurs do. The beginning of Facebook was a risk too. And so where does risk come from in this business? Risk comes from several areas, but among them, they are how many people can you sell this to, and that's the prevalence issue. But the other is proof of concept. How far have you gotten from a good idea, which gives you potential and allows you to spin a story of how you hope this is going to work, and actually showing that it works the way you think it does. Because one of the things that's great about people, they have great imaginations, and I have many friends of mine, this is what fundamental researchers should do for a living. They think about, well, gosh, if I could just do this, I could do that. And sometimes the mistakes they make is to say that they're thinking that this should work actually will translate to actually working and showing it actually working. And those two are completely different things. And if you're in the drug development business or you're a patient, you don't want potential. You want something that actually does something. As a rare disease mom told me a few years ago, she said, I love fundamental discoveries. They're absolutely the basis of everything that we do here. But when my daughter gets sick, I can't give her a publication. And I think about that a lot. And publications are wonderful. I have 300 of them myself, so there are many of them. But so the question is, how do we go from one to the other? So NCATS, in many ways, is in the de-risking business. So it's called the Valley of Death for a reason. It's a risky place. It's where projects go to die. And so if you're an investor and you can give your money to the next generation of Candy Crush, or you can give it to something called the Valley of Death, which one would you do?
We generally don't brand it as such on our slides.
Yeah, right,
but
exactly.
Yes, yes.
And so NCATS frequently serves as a chaperone in this case. I mean, we have about half of the projects that we have in that stage are with small companies who have great ideas. There's enough data that suggests this really should work, but they don't have the considerable resources that it takes to actually show that it can work and gets to an IND. Something that all of you should know, and you may know it already, but I always have to remind my basic colleagues of this, is roughly you can think about the translational business, or the business of going from a fundamental discovery to a clinical trial. I mean, forget about even after clinical trial in people, in 4 epochs, and don't worry about the epochs at this point, scientifically.
4 what, sorry?
Four broad stages.
Stages, okay, got it.
And the first stage is the one that we all know about, that's basic research. You can get a postdoctoral fellow for, say, $100,000 a year, maybe a graduate student. That'll cost you about $100,000. But the next stage per project costs you about $1 million. The next stage after that of going into a small-scale clinical trial, that'll cost you about $10 million. And then a registration trial costs you around $50 million, $100 million. So the point I'm making is that the cost goes up by tenfold each time. So there's this idea that there's a pipeline, and the pipeline says, well, okay, goes in the beginning, comes out unchanged at the end. It's like water. No. The cost is tenfold each time you go forward. So the terrible decisions that we all make every day is, well, gosh, I could do, if I'm in the 3rd stage here, I can do 1 project, but I could do 100 basic research projects. Well, if I'm going to do a clinical trial, a definitive clinical trial, I could do 1,000 basic research projects. So where should I put my money? It's a very hard decision. But I don't think most people, certainly the public, doesn't realize this. And so in some of the arguments that you see, well, the public sector, the NIH, has done a lot of the fundamental work. So therefore, they should, they paid for it. Well, no. Because that assumes that the cost function is constant from beginning to the end, and it is not. The cost goes like this. So even if you've gotten halfway through the process, through phase 1, stage 1 and stage 2, you still have stage 3 and stage 4 where 98% of the cost remains, even after NIH has done its work. So what NCATS tries to do is go one step further, but that's very expensive. So it's tenfold more expensive to do 1 project at NCATS than it is at others. We'll routinely spend $5, $10, $20 million on 1 project. Why? And John knows why. That's what you have to get a project ready, get a disease.
And frankly, Chris, that's light.
That's light.
Even in a rare disease.
Very light. Yes.
What you just described is what we as biotech entrepreneurs do every year,
yes.
every day.
Yes.
Constantly look at our portfolio.
Yes.
I would love to work in hundreds of rare
yes.
diseases.
I know.
And we're a reasonably sized biotech company these days.
Yeah.
And even then, we can only work in a handful.
Yes.
What you also described is what we deal with every day on our end of the spectrum, and that's managing risk.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily that hard financial calculus of, we won't work in this disease unless we can make X dollars.
Yeah.
Yes, we always say at Amicus, our first mission is to patients.
Yeah.
One of my great mentors was a fellow named Saul Bearer. Saul was the founder of a company called Celgene, which makes wonderful medicines for people with cancer. Incredible focus on science. Saul always told me, John, just focus on making great medicines, and then all the business success will follow. So we try to live that. So our first mission for patients, which is also aligned with our mission for shareholders, if we can make the best medicines for patients as quickly as possible, we'll build shareholder value, which will enable us to have financial returns to invest in handfuls more, dozens more of these disorders. So there is a capital efficiency to it. We can only invest so many places. With that, understanding how we're in the business of risk taking. Absolutely. We are not in the business of risk mitigation. If we were, we wouldn't be in biotechnology. But this is where we want to be. So how do we manage risk? I think about it from our standpoint. The major risks are really twofold. One are technologies. Is an idea, is a medicine, a technology, is it going to work? Is it going to become an approved drug? And secondly, how long is it going to take to get there? I could tell you with Amicus, we did pretty rare feat. We went from idea to molecule to medicine for precision medicine in Fabry that was then approved in Europe and soon to be filed in the US. That's pretty rare. It took us 12 years to do that. Hundreds of millions of dollars for medicine that will hopefully help thousands of people. That's a long time. Where do you see in that spectrum, where do you best help us manage risk? Because ultimately it's on us. There may be some diseases where you say, here, John, here's the NDA, now go. That's pretty long down the road. And there may be some where here's some great animal experiments we've done. Now it's somewhat de-risked, take it forward. Where there do you play?
So first point, then I'll answer the question. It's fascinating the way you put it, which I think is right. You are in the risk-taking business. We are in the risk mitigation business. And that's because we are trying to mitigate risk for you. That's our job. And that's why when it works beautifully because our missions are completely complementary. And so that risk comes from time, as you said, time and cost. And so we think about, when we looked at this problem, we've asked, well, where does that time come and failure come from? It comes from really three areas probably, which is where we're spending a lot of our time. One is the fact that the clinical trial system in this country does not work very well.
We largely do clinical studies as we did 30, 40 years ago.
Exactly.
It's changing.
It's changing a little bit. So about 3/4 of NCATS effort is focused in the clinical space to say that it doesn't have to be that way. These are human-created systems for how we do clinical trials, and so we ought to be able to change them. They're not immutable laws of nature, and we have two large clinical programs, one called the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network and another one called the CTSA program. They're very broad consortia of academic health centers, the purpose of which is to shorten the time to from conception to initiation to completion of a high-quality clinical trial by tenfold. That's what we're aiming to do. And when we looked at the models, it's completely possible. It's just that Amicus could never do it because it's not your job.
Tenfold. That's tenfold. Going from...
Tenfold.
My example, call it a decade of development for a Fabry drug. Doing it in a year.
Well, you ought to be able to get you only ought to be limited by how long it takes you to find out whether the drug works. But it shouldn't. So currently, it can easily take 2 years to simply get a trial started because of multiple IRB reviews. People die during that time. And that is a totally human-created problem that we can solve. The problem of recruitment. It's astounding that depending on how you do the math, in NIH terms, around 70% of NIH-funded trials fail to recruit enough patients to even find out whether the intervention worked.
70%?
70%, yeah. And again, you know, in an era of Ticketmaster, you know, where a concert will sell out in 5 minutes, it's not an informatics problem; it's a human problem. So we're spending a lot of our time on that. To move back one, the problem of going from animals to humans. I myself have had multiple experiences where the animal model looks fantastic, and animal models are great. Don't get me wrong; they've been essential for many things. But for testing novel molecules in human diseases, rats are rats and humans are humans, and for the most part. I know some humans are a little more like rats, but we'll leave that aside. I live in Washington. And so we've created this program called the Tissue Chip Program, which is the purpose of which is to create really space-age, three-dimensional microfluidic systems made of human cells, which model the structure and function of all human tissues, and to be able to use those to test safety and effectiveness of novel therapeutics, not giving them to animals. And that should be, again, tenfold faster, tenfold cheaper. We're deeply engaged with FDA in this because they've been involved on the team from the very beginning. And the third area we spend a lot of time on is a broader scientific mission, but it comes under the rubric of empiricism. That is, if you ask, how do you develop a drug? And you look at each of the stages that goes through. For the most part, the answers are based on intuition, past experience, trial and error, empiricism. And this is one of the things that really astounded me. I'm a geneticist by background, genetics on one side and clinical medicine, neurology on the other. Genetics is very clear, very deterministic. We know what the rules are. It's either an A or a T in your DNA strand. What I discovered as I got into translation is because we don't understand what the general principles are, like we do in genetics, we guess a lot of the time. And sometimes we guess right, sometimes we guess wrong, but the problem is the systems are so complicated that guessing is unlikely to be successful. Now, they could be educated guesses, right? And experienced people make educated guesses. But our mission is to transform this whole process from a trial and error empirical process to a predictive science. So I'll just give you one analogy of what we're trying to do here. It has been said by more than one wag, not inappropriately, that if drug developers develop drugs the way engineers build bridges, they would have no idea how to build the bridge. They would just start building. And they would throw some things together and see if it works. And 99% of the time, the bridge would fall down. And one of the time, they'd get the bridge to the other side, and they'd celebrate, not figure out how they got to the other side, because they're just so darn glad that they got to the other side. They just keep going. And the next poor person comes to build the next bridge, and their 99 bridges fill down. What is the matter with you people? I get asked by engineers.
I get that a lot.
Right. Yeah, I certainly do. And I tried to work on this problem. If you ask, well, why is this such a fascinating problem, right? Why is nobody asked this question? It's a really important question. It's because, again, the way our ecosystem has worked up until NCATS. If you
so
ask,
take it to rare diseases
yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Increasingly, it's more and more challenging to do traditional clinical studies.
Yes.
Placebo controls.
Yes. Yep.
P-values. Things like this.
Yep.
This whole notion of trial and error, the empiricist view of medicine.
Yep.
How do we change that? What becomes different in the rare diseases?
Yeah, so rare diseases, and I choose my words carefully here, but I hope you'll know what I mean, are lucky in one way and one way only, which is that we understand, in many cases, the biology much better than we do with more common diseases. For instance, Alzheimer's disease. My father-in-law just died of Alzheimer's disease. I used to work on Alzheimer's disease.
We know very little, almost nothing.
Almost nothing.
Autism.
Autism is another great example. But at least with rare diseases, we frequently have a genetic lesion. It's very clear what causes it. So that...
My daughter Megan used to look at my son John running around, my son with Asperger's and ADHD, and yell at him and say, "John, sit down."
Yeah.
She said, "Oh my God," when she was like 4 years old, he was 5 or 6. "I know what's wrong with me. I need one enzyme and I'll be fine."
Right.
I have absolutely no idea how many enzymes Daddy has to make to help you.
That's so true.
In fact, they go to college across the street from each other. They're a year apart. She still says the same thing to him.
That's absolutely true.
So how does it work then, Chris? You're centered.
Yeah.
Great value.
Yeah.
You're a parent. You've
Yeah.
got a newly diagnosed child
Yeah.
of one of these rare diseases where there is no medicine,
Yeah.
very little research going on,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
knock on your door.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Well, so that's happened many times.
Happens all the time, I would imagine.
Yeah, it has. And the first thing that we did, which I like to think is becoming a trend, is we said yes. And that has not always been the case. The second is to realize...
I'm sorry, said yes to what?
Can I work with you?
Okay.
When a patient knocks on the door.
So mom and dad come in,
Yeah.
they've got a little child with
Yeah.
a rare disease.
Yeah.
They need help.
Yeah. And so we have started many collaborations that start with parents or patients who then bring in the scientists, not the other way around. And those projects have been outsized successful for a variety of reasons that we might want to talk about if you're interested. But the question then for us is, we're no matter how many projects we do, we're like Amicus. We can only do a small number of projects. How do we generalize this? So we've been working for some years on how to enable everyone else to do this. And I know Global Genes has done this, a lot of this. And our sort of crowning achievement so far has come through the help of Global Genes and many other organizations like Genetic Alliance and others, something called the NCATS Toolkit for Patient-Focused Drug Development. It's something that we just unveiled last Friday. So I hope if you Google NCATS Toolkit, you'll find it. It is a remarkable collection of tools for a parent who has just been diagnosed. And it was put together under our auspices, so we paid for it, we did all the guts, but it was really driven by patients' advocates, mainly by Ron Bartek from Friedreich's ataxia and Annie Kennedy from PPMD, but there were many others who were involved. And if you go to that site, it actually starts with getting started. Click that, and there will be tools from Genetic Alliance, from Global Genes, from Europe, from the FDA, from NCATS, from other parts of NIH, and they have been vetted for what a parent or a patient wants to know in what order. And so we're kind of viewing this like, if you're going to build a house, you don't want to have to make your own tools. You want to be able to go to the Home Depot and get a toolbox and get a good hammer to get a good screwdriver and all that stuff. And that's what this really is. We didn't actually have to create very many new tools. We just had to bring them together and put them in a way that would fit how a parent thinks or how a patient thinks, not how a scientist thinks.
What about a little further upstream? So maybe you're the mom or the dad and you've pushed science pretty far and you've got a medicine, you've got a gene therapy, whatever it may be.
Yep.
And now you think it's ready for the clinic to
Yes.
help your child
Yes.
and others. Or
Yep.
you're an entrepreneur and you've got your 10-person biotech startup.
Yes.
But boy, you don't know
Yes.
what you don't know.
Yep.
You don't know how complex the
Yes.
regulatory
Yes.
environment is. How do you make this? What is GMP?
Yes.
What are IRBs? All of
Yep.
that. Then you get that knock on the door.
Yep. So that's
How
all.
can-
That's
how
all,
can you help?
So that's all on the site too. It goes through actually discovery, preparing for clinical trials, doing clinical trials. What is all the regulatory process and post-marketing? But once you read all that, just reading it won't get anything done. What I always encourage people to do is email me. And I know that sounds silly, but please do it. Remember, everything we do is a collaboration with somebody. We don't do anything until we get a phone call. And we view our job is to take all that we have that does nothing by itself bolt on what real needs of real people are, whether they're scientists or patients, and that is the magic that will create new science and new understanding and new therapeutics. So we do projects in everything from parent comes in or scientist comes in, I have a gene mutation in this disease, where do I start? And we'll design a high-throughput screening assay from the very beginning and do repurposing, screen hundreds of thousands of compounds looking for a novel chemical, do all the med chem, do all the pharmacology, then it goes into trend if you're at that stage where if you have a lead, goes all the way to IND, and then we have clinical programs that go from IND to we don't go all the way to NDA, but usually we don't need to at that point.
Chris, give us an example of, you've been doing this for a little bit now.
Yeah.
What's been your greatest success? What are you most proud of? The program that's gone the furthest, had the biggest impact on patients?
Yeah, so there are many by this time.
Sure. But one that would be a real exemplar of this collaborative nature, bringing everybody together and having a positive outcome.
Yeah, well, so I would give you two. One is a project on Niemann-Pick C disease that we started probably 10 years ago. That's an incredible collaboration of probably 10 patient groups, 5 universities, 3 NIH institutes, the FDA, 2 companies, all to come together to create, the goal was to create a therapy for children living with this disease in their lifetime. That was the goal. And the project hasn't been completed yet, but because it's in phase 3 trials now with a company. But the important thing is that it not only got us through this stage from an initial idea to hopefully a therapeutic, but also taught us a lot about how to do this. So if you're going to try this at home, how do you do it? So we actually have written papers about why we think this collaborative structure worked. I'll give you another one, which is going on now. There's a gene therapy for a disorder called aromatic amino acid decarboxylase deficiency, AADC. It's a rare disorder of kids. Most of them die by their teens. And there were some studies in Taiwan that showed that single gene therapy replacement into the brain for these children was remarkably effective. There was a company who got interested in it, but they were not able to progress it for all the reasons we're talking about. So we partnered with them. We did all the tox, all the GLP work, all the IND enabling work, all the regulatory, and now they're going to submit a BLA probably at the beginning of next year. And so there's multiple examples where projects were dead in the water, good science, a lot of potential, but never would have gone anywhere. And all we had to do was de-risk it, and then the market took over.
Great examples, and you mentioned obviously both of them. I'm sure Niemann-Pick C. I'm more familiar with. Coach Ara Parsegian was a dear friend, and his son Mike and daughter-in-law Cindy.
Well, you should know that project, for those, I hope you hear this in the room, that project started with Cindy Parsegian.
That's right. Cindy and
coming
Ara,
into my office,
former head football coach at Notre Dame, who lost 3 of his grandchildren to Niemann-Pick C, became a real champion for Niemann-Pick C in the rare disease community. Ara passed away after a good life at age 94 last month, but certainly a great legacy. There is a common view that in a rare disease, there is a patient organization or a patient community. Oftentimes not the case, even for very, very rare diseases like Niemann-Pick C. And sometimes patient groups are not aligned. How do you manage that? How do you manage conflict when you've got 3, 5 patient groups coming to you with different ideas or views on the same ideas?
It's really hard, I must say, and it's we've dealt with this in multiple circumstances, and interestingly, what we found is that the conflict, surprisingly to me when it first happened, those groups have tended to stick together until there is a clear therapy in in mind. There's a real possibility, it looks like it might work. And then the groups splinter. And it's left the scientists whose job it is to work on a therapy for all children with this disease, even those who have not been born yet. The children with NPC who are going to be born today. We have to think about those as much as other, whereas the patient groups and the parents are understandably thinking about their own children. And that's not a bad thing. That's the way it should be. But it's created really heart-wrenching situations for me personally.
How can we help you? How can we, as patient advocates, a patient community?
I think it's first of all to, and this is probably true in all realms of human endeavor, is to give the scientists the benefit of the doubt that they really are trying to do the right thing, and they are, if they're doing things which are don't seem right to you, it's probably because it's what's required in their environment. They're responding to what they have to do for university issues or tenure. It's because they're doing it for regulatory reasons. They're doing it for some other reason that is a good reason, but it's not to just be obstructionist. And I would say that as patient groups, think of yourselves as ambassadors or peace negotiators, perhaps, because you have a credibility, a street cred, as it were, that we as scientists will never have. We have never walked in your shoes. And so when I talk to a patient advocacy group who may be unhappy with us, actually it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, the conversation goes very differently if it's me as a scientist or it's a fellow parent and so you can make a huge difference to the progress of science by jumping into those sometimes uncomfortable situations and try to mediate. I'm a big one on over-communicating. I don't think you can over-communicate, especially in a field like this where all of us speak such different languages. It's one of the problems that we have. If you look at the language spoken by biologists or chemists or informatics people or basic scientists or clinical scientists or regulatory people or public health people or parents, they literally are different languages. And so we frequently run into misunderstandings because people are using the same word to mean completely different things. Happens all the time. So I would say try to give the scientists the benefit of the doubt and realize how incredibly integral you are to this process. We cannot do what we do without you.
I mean, our view has always been, in our view, I mean, as innovators, as patient advocates, the whole community, that you've got to put the patient at the center.
Yeah.
And everybody says it, but how do you live it?
Well,
and how do you, because ultimately our job, my job, your job, is to break down barriers and ultimately to help extend and enhance human life.
Yes.
Period. That's it. And it's a battle against nature. But it's also a battle against time. And Wendy, I see you're up at your... Yeah, I was going to say, why don't we go ahead and pivot? We've got maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so and see if there's any questions from the audience. So,
I think the other thing I just want to mention, this is an answer to your question, how you can help. So we think, I keep saying that we're all about generalizable principles. How can we make the virtuous circle happen more efficiently, grease the skids, as it were? John, what you said a second ago reminded me that we view the issue of patient engagement or person engagement, having them on the research team, that is an area of science for us. We don't understand what the general principles are. What are the best practices of involving patients in this work? What works, what doesn't, all of that. So we want to experiment with you. And actually, one of the reasons we took on this NPC project, one of the reasons that I made it a pilot project, was that I wanted this project to be a test case of how to work with 8 or 9 or 10 different patient groups all at once, together with, and so it was a giant experiment. And
Well,
so
hopefully it works. You've come a long
Yes.
way, and I think the medicine's got a lot of promise. And
probably
and
6
again,
months from now we'll know.
Not a cure, but
Yeah,
it could
no,
be,
not a cure.
could be a treatment that
Yes.
moves us along
Before
so
we
come
can
back
get a
to the
cure.
top of the circle again.
Exactly.
Happy to take any questions. I see a couple folks, please.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Dory, and I was that mom who took a risk many years ago to go to the NIH and start a clinical trial for my daughter who has an ultra-rare disease called NOMID. She's currently at, I always have to look at it, NIAID, and prior to that at NIMS. My question is this. My biggest fear is what happens next? She's in the clinical trial. She's in a lifelong study. She has a therapy, one of the 5% that works. And I'm worried about the next step as far as a mom, of the interest in her disease. She's less than 100 cases throughout the world.
Yeah.
How do I, as a parent, our small advocacy group, really support the next generation of scientists and leaders, particularly, for example, getting maybe a couple fellowships, people who may be interested in this line of rare diseases to come into the Institute to continue on with the research. I love her physician. Dr. Goldbach-Mansky is amazing, but she will retire at some point. And I fear that, and I welcome that because she deserves it, but I don't know exactly what happens next.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to?
So what do you do next to carry on? You've made good progress. How do you move to an even better treatment, better understanding, and maybe a cure?
Yeah, and ongoing care, if I understand the question. Yeah, two things I would suggest, or one thing I suggest and one thing that to let you know what we're doing. One of the very gratifying issues in our business in the last 20 years, and John, you live this every day, which has also created a new set of problems, is that children who used to die of these disorders don't anymore. They're living to adulthood 2-3 times longer than they used to. The CF folks are, of course, leading the way on this, and our healthcare system has yet to adapt, because these disorders, since the dawn of time, have only been seen by pediatricians. Internists are not trained about these things because they never saw them, because all the patients died. And the professional societies have not caught up with this. So as a patient, I know you are used to advocating in a variety of other formats, but where you need to turn now is the professional societies. Each of the little physician groups, have, like I have the American Academy of Neurology, which sets educational guidelines, care guidelines, who's going to get educated in what, the requirements for the boards, all of that kind of stuff. Because what you're describing is a need for entirely new or additional expertise in internal medicine, adult internal medicine. I mean, that's where you're.
And that's what, I mean, just to add on that and conclude, I think we're seeing that in Pompeii. The doctors who diagnosed our children 20 years ago have retired or are retiring. Y.T. Chen at Duke went on to start a center in Taipei in Taiwan. His fellow, Priya Krishnani, is now the chief of medical genetics at Duke. And I mean, Priya will someday need to impart that learning, and she does a beautiful job of it. But I would really build on that and encourage you to help funding, fellowships. There are very few geneticists in this country, even broadly the field of genetic medicine. Please.
Hi, my name is Gina. I'm with the Alport Syndrome Foundation, and thank you for offering us to email you. Fair warning, I'm taking you up on that. But
You can text him too.
Yeah, right.
Put his number up there and I'll get on it.
I'm easy to find, I'm afraid.
Very
I'll get
good
it
to know.
Go ahead, please.
I wanted to see if you could speak a little bit about the role of registries in the prioritization. You've spoken about funding fellows and basic science, and I'm sure we're not alone as an organization struggling as to how to prioritize our very valuable to us, but not incredibly large research dollars. Where in that prioritization process should investment in registries and natural history data be?
Maybe I'll just, on that point, I'll tell you as an innovator, drug developer, in rare diseases, registries are incredibly important, helping to understand the natural history, progression. A real challenge for us in some of the lysosomal storage disorders we work in is that there are other companies who have incredibly rich histories and databases that they view as proprietary, and we don't have access to that. So it's a waste of time, frankly, and resources where I've got to reinvent and build our own registries.
So silly.
My view, we will never have an amicus registry that nobody else can see. This is just knowledge. It's not medicine, patents, intellectual property. That to me is a waste of time and resources. We need to evolve to a place where registries are shared tools to enable drug development and medicines.
Yeah, and I would just add on to what John said. When I went to the FDA about 7 or 8 years ago and talked to a woman named Ann Pariser, who now works for us, who, as some of you may know, is using the Office of New Drugs, doing rare diseases for many, many years. And I asked her, okay, this is the beginning of Trend, right after it started. And I asked them, she and Mark Walton at the FDA, so I asked them exactly the same question. So when projects come to you and they fail, rare disease projects, why do they fail? Because those are the things we're going to work on. And I expected her to say, oh, well, it's toxicity or it's wrong dosing schedule or something. No, no, no. They said the top 3 reasons are lack of a registry in natural history, lack of a registry in natural history, and lack of a registry in natural history. That is the most important thing you can possibly do.
Yeah. And the FDA is increasingly open to, in rare diseases, more creative, faster ways to do clinical studies. I'm very, very pleased with the changes I've seen in the last year or so at FDA. I think it's very encouraging for all of us. And I think it's about leadership, culture, innovation. It's not about lower standards at FDA. It's about advancing regulatory science to meet the exciting new world of medical science. I think Scott Gottlieb has been a tremendous leader, pro-patient and pro-science, and very rigorous. And likewise, Janet Woodcock, I think will be very helpful in helping us to reinvent this drug development paradigm in a way that will help us manage risk and get medicines to patients sooner.
Hello, Dr. Austin. So welcome to your first
Thank you.
Global Genes, Patient Summit. This is my 6th, and I'm going to ask you a question because, or an ask with your help and collaboration. So my name's Carol Dutch. I work at Lumos Pharma, but I am part of the Corporate Alliance. And with the Corporate Alliance, we just established a new working group, and it's working with the Child Neurology Foundation and Global Genes. And what we're trying to do is to measure, to get a number. You and John have been speaking a lot about numbers and figures, and they, everybody perks up because we think about 7,000 rare diseases. We would like to find out how many rare diseases have a neurological component to it in a pediatric setting. So we've set out this working group, we've gotten some collaborators, but I think that you can help us in directing us to the right person.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you do that?
Yeah, we have a project which I think you'll be very interested in about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, or send me an email if you can't find me.
Good.
So I think by Wendy's presence, we may now be short of time. I know there are other questions. Chris, if you wouldn't mind maybe hanging out by the stage, we'll be happy to.
I just wanted to say that, thanks, Chris. We have been working with NCATS for many years now. And I just wanted to say that in the NF space, and just one line, because I think this is really important, it's coming together with multiple funders, fund to postdoc at NCATS, and we've been able to catapult the way we could do research and development in NF. So I think it's really bringing those funders together to co-fund something, but because it's worthwhile. Thanks,
Great.
Chris.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Very good.
Hi, my name is Francis Kalush, and I work for the FDA. And this is a great session. And you were talking about natural history and registries. And we are organizing a workshop with Global Genes at the FDA, October 30, for everybody who wants to participate. It's at our White Oak campus. And we are going to be discussing different case studies and also showing the flexibility of the FDA by using natural history cases. And you are all welcome to attend. And thank you very much for raising natural histories and registries. That's
Yeah.
what's missing from.
Great, and thanks for all the great work at FDA.
And one final thing, we had a question come in. Could you, just for the patient group, patients out here, I don't know if we can put it up there, we can send it out, but the name of where the patients can find the toolkits?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can I just, what's the easiest thing? Send it to you and you can put it on the app?
Sure, we could do that.
Great,
right?
yeah, we'll put it on the app.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Very good.
Okay.
We'll put it on the app.
Within this session?
Great.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Chris,
Well,
thank you.
Yeah,
for
thank you.
being here. Thanks for all the
Yeah,
work you do.
yeah,
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great job. Nice job. That was really good. We have we have a lovely book, Rare is Everywhere, for you guys. So what a great session. We learned all about the virtuous circle to drive development and how it really, of course, has to be patients at the center. And if we can keep that and we can all work together to figure out how to be more efficient, we're going to get further faster. And what a great job the NIH translational group is doing in looking at projects that help bridge that gap, that make that whole virtuous circle more efficient, that de-risk across the valley of death, or whatever we're going to brand that, and for biotechs, and help patient advocates with their toolkit, and thinking about how we're going to all work together to make this work better and to have more therapies for more of our rare disease patients. All right, so next we are going to have Julia, right? From the EveryLife Foundation Advocacy Research Rally for Medical Research. Julie Jenkins is the executive director, and she is here, right there. Well, come on up. All right, thanks, Julie.
Hi, good to see you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Of course, I get to follow two amazing speakers and amazing people in the rare disease community, but what I get to do actually is help you advocate for the NIH today. So, do I have a clicker? Yes? Oh no, green. All right, there we go, action alert. Just a little bit about our foundation and why I'm here today. So we are a science-based advocacy organization, and we kind of have 4 big policy goals. And this morning I hope to help accomplish 2 of those goals today. So we want to close the innovation gap for the 95% of rare diseases that have no FDA-approved treatment. And we do that through a number of ways, but one of them is really critical, which is supporting robust funding for the NIH. The other really critical thing is that we believe that patients should have a voice in policymaking, in drug development, and in the regulatory process. And so we are here today to encourage all of you to take action and make sure Congress hears your voice. So we are very proud sponsors of the Rally for Medical Research. Yesterday, we had 300 national organizations on Capitol Hill, my team included, to call on the nation's policy makers to make funding for the NIH a national priority and raise awareness about the important investment in medical research. And I'm going to have all of you guys join me here today. We're going to probably have to turn up the lights because this is not just me presenting, it's an activity. But you heard today from Dr. Austin about why medical research is important. And this is really critical. Actually, I sent the wrong slide deck. That's fun. So this, one of the big reasons you heard Dr. Austin today talk about the different things that the NIH funds. Some of the things, I'm not sure if he mentioned, but there's an undiagnosed disease program at the NIH. The NIH actually treats patients, as well as funding critical patient organization projects. Dr. Austin talked a little bit about this, about losing the purchasing power. So you can see this gap of where the funding should be and where it is currently. So our voices are really critical. And there was a point in time where the NIH budget doubled because the patient communities came together and demanded more funding for the NIH. And we need to do that again. So today's ask, everyone's getting sheets passed out But we are here to join the Rally for Medical Research, and we're going to call on Congress today. That means everyone has to get out their cell phones. And we want to ask Congress to ensure that there is $2 billion increase in NIH funding for a total of $36 billion. You could just say $2 billion. But anyway, so we're going to do this two ways. We have two different action alerts today. The first is to call members of Congress. That's on one side of the paper. And then the other side of the paper is for social media. And you can fill in your disease. You can fill in what you think is important. And take photos and share on social media to be a part of the rally. All right, action alert. Has anyone here called their member of Congress before? Yes, I love it. Excellent. Does everyone call their member like every month? Because you should call your member every month. All right, yes. They should know who you are. So we have this simple, easy number. I'll be honest, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But just keep trying. But if you dial this number and press 1 and enter your 5-digit zip code, it will actually automatically connect you to all 3 of your members of Congress. So you call, you get the first person, you give the script, and then you call, and then when it's finished, it'll move on to the next one. There's a lot of you in the room, and there's a lot of people online. So if you're doing this online or in the room and you start getting busy signals, that's great. That means we're making an impact, and there's not enough staff in the office to pick up the phone. All right. Oh, all right. So I've got a few teammates around the room that are passing out flyers, and some of my teammates that can help if you have issues with calls. I see some in the back of the room. Lindsay's raising her hand back there. Jen is right there raising her hand. Yes, Stephanie. All right. So if you guys have questions, but my presentation's short. This is all about you guys picking up the phone and making your calls right now. So, John, come on, pick up your phone. Chris, Dr. Austin actually can't call and make this ask. But everyone else, all right. I didn't even bring my phone up here. But, all right.
Chris and I was just laughing. He said, John, pick up your phone, call your senator. I'm like, I would, but he's on trial in Newark right now.
Seriously.
Oh, yeah, Bob Menendez.
No, I know,
Oh,
I know.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'll call the federal courthouse, see if I can get him. And I'll just text Corey.
Not always. Do they answer? Are people calling? Okay, is everyone finishing up their calls? Who made their very first call to Congress today? Okay, who wants to share their story about how that went? Oh, come on. If I have to get up here to speak, you can at least go to that podium right there. Come on, who's my volunteer? It wasn't that terrible, was it? Was it easy? I'm looking at you right there, because you're right in my viewpoint. You stand up and tell me how it went? No? Anyone more experienced want to share how their call went? All right, excellent. Do you want to go to the mic right behind you? Or right over there? How'd it go? Is that on?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that it went fine. I got one voicemail where I left a message, and I spoke live to a second person. And the third one, they put me on hold for the DC office. So I hung up and I called the local office.
Awesome.
So I would encourage everyone to look up the senators in particular usually have several regional offices that you can try if you don't get through to DC.
Awesome. How'd it go?
Good morning. My calls today to our senators went fantastic. I got a hold of 4. Very, very excited. They're used to hearing my voice. They're definitely used to seeing me because I go to in-district lobby days, and then I tell them there that I'll see them on the Hill at the Capitol. So I'm very, very, very thankful for Senator Langford, Tom Cole, John Inhofe. Thank you guys so much for what you do for NIH funding, and you guys know you'll see me again. I'm here to rally for support for my daughter, Alani, fighting lipodystrophy, Lipodystrophy United. You guys know how I do it. I'm loud and I'm proud. I'm a special needs mommy. This disease is 1 in 10 million, and I'm gonna scream it to the tops of Capitol Hill here at Global Genes Advocacy Summit. No matter where it is, no matter where I gotta be, I'm gonna always represent rare. That's what I do. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and everyone has their rally sign. Make sure to take it with you today. Take some photos with your rally sign, post them on social media. There's hashtags, you can hashtag your photos so that they show up on the rally Twitter feed, I guess that's how it works. And for those of you who want to do more, I encourage you all to join us on Capitol Hill. We are planning to bring 400 patients to DC this year to meet with their members of Congress. So we'd love to see you all there. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. So I was surprised, actually. I got 3 of my senators because I live in Illinois, and we're not really known for really effective government. Yeah. Okay, next up, I'm very excited to introduce a wonderful panel with leaders from clinical research to discuss how digital health is transforming and will transform rare disease clinical trials. So please welcome Manther Bara, head of the new clinical paradigm for Pfizer, Dr. Jennifer Hall, chief of the Institute of Precision Cardiovascular Medicine at the American Heart Association, Kent Tolke, Executive Vice President, Scientific Medical Affairs and Safety Commercialization Services from PRA Health Services, and Dr. Tomasz Sablinski, CEO of Transparency Life Sciences. This discussion will be moderated by Dr. Linda Malner, scientist entrepreneur, strategic advisor and chair of the Technology for Precision Health Summit. So, Linda, you guys just all come on up and have a seat. Thank you.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here. I just love the energy at this conference that the patients and the patient advocates bring. I'm Linda Molnar. I am a San Francisco-based scientist and entrepreneur. I work with philanthropists and investors to guide their strategic investments with the goal of transforming healthcare. My focus is on the prediction and prevention of disease, both returning patients to health and also maintaining a state of health. I'm thrilled to be here because I believe in engaging patients and patient advocates in the earliest stages of development, and I do believe that technology can help us get there. I had a summary slide. Anyone know who has control of the slides? Perfect. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief intro because I want to spend most of the time with our amazing panelists. But I wanted to set the stage here a little bit because I know how frustrating it can be when you're waiting for a therapy to be developed for a sick child. So I wanted to give us all some perspective on really how quickly digital health technologies are entering the healthcare arena. If we look at this slide, we can see on the far left, a lot of us in this group are concerned about gene sequencing in our genetics. Illumina, the major sequencing company, only had a market cap of $250 million back in 2005. Today, in 2017, the market cap of that company is over $30 billion. And the costs for sequencing the genome have decreased dramatically in that time period, making it accessible to nearly everyone. As another point of reference, again on the far left of the slide, the investment in digital health back in 2005 was essentially negligible. But in 2017, just for the first half of 2017, it broke all investment records ever. It's already above $4 billion. In the previous several years, it was at the level of $4 billion for each year. So that's already been surpassed when the year is only half over. I also wanted to make note of a couple other advancements that we all know about. It's only been 10 years since 2007 that we've all been using smartphones, and now they're nearly ubiquitous. I think it's important when we think about rare disease patients that are scattered all over the globe, that we can make healthcare delivery accessible to everyone. And also I want to end with one more, the iPad, which is also becoming increasingly important. That's also now ubiquitous in the clinical care setting. So what we're going to do is start with each of our panelists giving a brief introduction of themselves and their background and their current role. I also would like for each of them to define what digital health technologies mean to them, because we all come to this conference looking through a particular lens. I know for myself, when people mention digital health technologies, I immediately think about wearables. But Manther is going to tell us a bit about the background digital technologies that are used in drug development today. So Munther, I'd like you to start with the introduction, mostly because when I saw that you were going to be a panelist, I was very curious and interested to know what it means to be the head of the new clinical paradigm at a large pharma company like Pfizer.
Great. It's a small group, so. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. As you said, Munder Bara from Pfizer. I had a group called New Clinical Paradigm within business technology, and I'm a business partner for the clinical innovation at Pfizer within the operational team. What I look out for is really new trends in the industry, and we call that what we call is the zoom out, zoom in, basically. So we try to understand what's happening around us outside of the pharma in general, whether it's advancement of technology, mobile sensors, AI, deep learning, everything you mentioned in the slide, blockchain, and all that stuff. And then we do the zoom in is we go back and say, how can we apply some of those new technologies and new trends internally, basically, within pharma. And we also look at new business models as well as a result of that, because sometimes, what we've done in the last 100 years, really, the process of executing clinical trials has been exactly the same. All what we've done is try to optimize it and squeeze it from different corners. We did not fundamentally look in terms, can we remove some aspect of this? How can we expedite this? But I think it is fair to say that we've done major advancement, but nothing what I call disruptive innovation, basically. And in the last 2-3 years, and I think in the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see large advancement in terms we're cracking that platform and we're thinking differently, we're thinking out of the box, and we're seeing a lot of that. So to me, digital tools is about the patient experience. It's not really implementing technology for the sake of technology. It's about the patient experience and their awareness of clinical trials. Their understanding of clinical trials, their decision-making in terms of how informed they are, what the clinical trial is all about. And then it comes down to patient retention and engagement when we conduct the studies, how they are involved. And the other piece, which is we always talk about, and actually this is probably the largest patient group and patient advocacy groups and conference I've been in the small settings, we always talk about another member, which is important, and you can clearly see it here, which is the patient caregiver as well. So that's another stakeholder in the formula that I think many misses, and that's what the technology tried to bring together, basically. In the last, somebody asked the question, what is patient centricity? And I know people talk about it, but it's not like a next buzzword. Actually, we've taken actions to make that happen. 6 years ago, we started, one of the main things that patients complain is they don't know what happened to the study they participated in. Pharma does a very poor job in terms basically sharing back with the patients what exactly happened in plain English. What is it? If my statistician comes to me, start talking about standard deviation, it goes over my head quickly. I have no idea what it's talking about. And that's what we started, what we call delay summary, where we start offering back to all our studies for the patients who basically wants to receive it at the last visit. They register with the website external to our company. We call it Pfizer Link, and they get those results. And then 2 years later, we experimented with Blue Button Plus, which is returning data back to patients. And actually, we have about 3 studies where we're returning data to patients as well in there, and we're trying to make it actually a more comprehensive for all our studies. We're trying to expand on it as well. But then 3 years ago, from the zoom out, we start looking in terms what's going on outside our industry. Everybody knows, of course, mobile been out there for a long time. When we interact with patients, we like to provision devices for the APRO and assessments and what have you. So we try to push the envelope. What we did is let's go for the bring your own device. And now we have studies that we're running that the patient have the flexibility whether to use a provision device or use your own mobile device. And that's improved retention and compliance, because think about it, not everybody likes to take 2 cell phones with them to work, and people start asking you questions, why do you have a second cell, why are you answering the cell phone, and what have you. as well as we started basically bringing tools to the patients where there is frequently asked questions, videos, scheduling, reminders, and what have you. So those are some of the tools that we're bringing into our studies. And then sensors is the other thing. And I think you'll start to hear more and more as people finish the studies and come and publish about it. There is, especially in the neuroscience and pain and others, whether it's the ActiWatch or activities that they're monitoring, sleeping, how active during the day, and other endpoints as well. So that's basically almost like a very comprehensive set of tools, whether it's mobile, whether it's sensors, whether it's returning data, but at the same time, we'll also try to be proactive in terms of providing more information about our trials. So we call it Find a Trial. You can go and find more information about it. And then as we interact with patients, we get feedback that these websites are as written for researchers. It's not written for the patient. So now we're taking actions in the next 2 to 3 months actually to make those are more usable. How long I'm gonna stay? How long does it take per day? What is it gonna do to my quality of life? Do I need to quit my job in order to be part of this study? That's the information we wanna put up in the front so people have a clear understanding what does that mean to them. I'm happy to report that in the last 18 months, we have more than 3,000 patients who are participating in some of the tools that we put out, whether it's mobile or sensors, over 25 countries. So this is why I always like to start by saying we're no longer optimized for the 20th century, because that's how our minds think. We today live in an global exponential world. If I ask you today, and when I say exponential, I really mean it. The technology advancement is like a hockey stick, and our adoption of technology is almost at the bottom. And we're trying to bridge the gap between how the technology could potentially help us in the clinical trials. I'll stop there and give the chance to others.
Well, thank you, Munther. I'm definitely going to come back to you on what exactly blockchain is, because you were saying you hesitate to understand standard deviation, and now you're throwing out blockchain to everybody. So we're going to call you out on that later to explain that. So Dr. Jennifer Hall, lovely to have you here with us from the American Heart Association. So as someone who has worked in oncology, I know that a lot of the precision medicine focus so far has been in cancer. So wonderful to hear about an institute that's focused on cardiovascular precision medicine.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you to Nicole and Maureen and all of you. That without you, this conference certainly would not be here. So thank you for your active participation. This is an exciting time, and I'm really honored to be a part of this. The vibe in this room is just fantastic. It's really a great opportunity. So like Linda said, I'm Jen Hall. I serve as chief of the Institute for Precision Cardiovascular Medicine at the American Heart Association. And really our goal, very briefly, is to just give hope and trust to all of our patients. And that may seem very simple, but it's a very deep message from all of us that serve within the AHA. And we have a small staff. We've been around for 93 years. The Institute is a new venture for us. It's been around for about 2 years. And it was created to really put patients at the center. We realized that we needed to step back. Instead of going into communities, we needed to be a part of those communities, within those communities, and be more cohesive with what they were trying to do. We needed to step back and listen better and talk less. And we have a couple of exciting programs that we can talk about later if you're interested. One is a direct-to-patient recruitment program, which really engages individuals. It's about wearable devices and asking all consumers to, as a volunteer opportunity, to share that data with all scientists to help discover new breakthroughs in science and find ways that your daily life patterns can help us find new scientific discoveries. As Linda was saying, the way that we think about wearable and electronic devices and sensors at the American Heart Association is also through our partnership with Amazon and Amazon Web Services. So a lot of the new voice-activated technologies we're bringing to life in the health space today. So I'll stop there and keep it quite short. But thanks again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jen. And next, we're going to hear from Kent Tolke. And you know, a lot of us here, the big names in pharma that are out there that we're used to seeing on drugs that are advertised and such. But you know, there are a lot of organizations that are doing great work sort of behind the scenes to really try and change the clinical paradigm. So please, Kent.
Thanks. So I'm Kent Tolke. I head up scientific and medical affairs for PRA Health Sciences, and we're very proud to be a presenting sponsor here and thrilled to have had the opportunity to work with Nicole and many of the organizations in the room for the last several years. For a lot of you who are unfamiliar with what we do, contract research organizations really kind of bridge the gap between the abilities for pharmaceutical and biotech companies to run and develop their drugs on a global basis. So we consider ourselves really a development partner in developing drugs. The difference is that where a pharma or biotech company may work with a handful of drugs, we literally work with thousands of drugs every year and tens and tens of thousands of patients worldwide. One of the opportunities I have within the organization is really to focus on innovation and how we connect patients to trials. And what we know, and what I thought was interesting in the last talk is most of the barriers to entry for patients in this room to participate in trials have been created by us. So the pharma industry, the regulators, we have created a model that makes it tremendously difficult for patients to participate in trials and to get drugs to market in a timely manner. And almost all of these are of our own creating. So there's nothing in this system that can't be changed. I think that one of the things that we're focused on, and I think that has been mentioned here a couple of times, is we have the technology today, and certainly in the rare patient population where patients may be hundreds or thousands or a continent away from the investigator looking at their disease, we have the ability to utilize mobile technology today to connect those patients so that at least geography should no longer be a barrier to entry for clinical trials. In addition to that, we know that everybody in this room and most patients worldwide since 2007 have had access to smartphones or iPhones or mobile devices. And that ability to allow you to participate in a trial and share a lot of your information and data through wearable and sensors with your physician and minimize the number of visits that's required for you to go to your physician will help lower those barriers as well. I think that too often people developing drugs and writing clinical trials and the requirements forget that everybody in this room has a job or children. For many of you that have sick or affected children, you also have healthy children. And so your world doesn't revolve around the clinical trial. And so how do we make participating in a clinical trial more integrated into your daily life and lower that barrier to entry? And the fact that we have wearable technology and sensors and things like that today that we can integrate into these trials should lower that barrier to entry. I think we continue to work a lot with the regulators and the pharmaceutical and biotech companies to help get them from a model that was built for the 20th century into the 21st century. I think what we have to remind people of is that on the pharma and biotech and CRO side, when we think about timelines, we think, well, you know, this is fantastic. We'll get this trial approved in 9 or 12 months, or this drug will get to market in 7 or 8 years. The reality is, for a lot of you that have children or have diseases, 6 or 8 years may be all you have. And those timelines are simply unacceptable. And what we need, and what I implore patient populations to do, is push back. So for so long, I think that on the drug development side, we have assumed that patients should be lucky to participate in our trials. And I would argue the exact opposite is true. Patients own all the power in this room. And you need to push back on the people that are developing drugs and say that the timelines are not acceptable today, and how do we fix that? I think if you take the model of the late 80s and early 90s when HIV and AIDS was an epidemic, it was really patients and patient populations and activism that pushed the regulators and pharmaceutical companies to say that it's not acceptable to wait 7 or 8 years and have another 1 million people die of this disease when we could push this faster. And that was really the last time we saw a massive uprising of patients affect drug development. And I would say that today, when you talk about patient centricity, we need patients to say, this is what it's going to take for us to participate in your trials, and this is how we want to operate to participate in those trials. I mean, barring making sure that we ensure patient safety and that the technology we're using is validated and we can ensure those endpoints and efficacy are true, there's lots of ways we can get these drugs to market faster, but it will require the patient voice to push back on us.
Thank you, Ken. It's great to have your perspective in the CRO across so many different pharmaceutical companies and the drugs they're developing. I like the emphasis that you put on maybe the use of wearables and sensors can make it so that the family doesn't have to focus so much on the child being in the clinical trial, right? You don't want to live your disease, you want to live your life. And hopefully that's one potentially very good outcome for patients. So look forward to hearing more about your work. And finally, we have Dr. Tomasz Sablinski, who's going to tell us about his background and also why he founded Transparency Life Sciences.
Thank you. So I am a drug developer by choice. I'm a physician by training and scientist, I guess. And spend a lot of time in corporate pharmaceutical world and with small biotech companies also on an investment side. And co-founded Transparency a few years ago. And like Ken's giant company, we offer services to whoever wants to develop drugs in a way that do clinical development in a way that has never been done before. So again, the difference is that in your P&L statement, there's probably a very small fraction that comes from trials that are done digital way. In our situation, it's everything. We are not interested in perpetuating legacy system, which is gone in terms of its ability to deliver. It's actually, frankly, very bad that people do continue invest in clinical trials that are done all the way. And we can talk about it. One of the questions is what prevents us from being more innovative. So the company was built on fundamental rethink of how clinical trials are done. And it's from A to Z. It starts from design. Design right now is not done properly, mainly because it's done in an inbred environment of few experts who keep repeating the same story to a variety of constituencies that they are asked to advise. And as you know from basic genetics, inbreeding doesn't produce geniuses. And that's what we end up with design. And certain trials, it's actually proven by methodology assessment, were showstoppers from the beginning, and yet they went into execution, and $50 million later, if it's phase 3 program, it just proved that the other guys failed for the same reason. That's not a good waste of money. There is a good waste of money in biotechnology, but this is not the one. So what we do, we ask patients and physicians who treat these patients to co-design a protocol with us. If possible, in a very transparent, hence the name of the company, way, in open source environment that we call Protocol Builder, which is our proprietary tool. We've done that many times with a great degree of success. And there is obvious reason why patients do it. There is also obvious reasons why physicians who are never asked to participate in design stage do it. And it's not money, it's passion. And it's, I have something to say. And if you provide them a tool in which is easy to use, it can be done, for 5 minutes in the airport, because we have questions that are very short to answer that relate to inclusion, exclusion criteria, endpoints, all kinds of things. It works. And obviously the process is then structured in the same way as any other clinical protocol. It has to be vetted through appropriate experts. But the inflow of idea is unrestricted. And the second big part of our model is, if you think about banking industry 25 years ago or 30 years ago, for those of you who are old enough to remember, When you wanted to get $50 from your bank account on Friday at 5 o'clock, good luck. You had to wait until the branch opened on Monday. And then you had to go there, stand in line, because everybody was there on Monday morning, and lucky you got your $50. Forward to the day, you get your bank machine to any ATM anywhere in the world, and within seconds, your money comes out. So competing banks somehow got to agree that they do this smoothly because they eventually all make money on it. So that's what digital clinical trials are going to look like, and that's what we've been pushing for and have fantastic response from the FDA. Any transaction in clinical trial that can be digitized, and digitized meaning happen without human intervention, without brick and mortar requirement of brick and mortar presence, is where we want to push. In rare diseases, the advantage is obvious, and I don't want to repeat it. If there is 200 patients, there are 200 patients in the United States, they're not going to live within walking distance to Harvard Medical School. That's just not happening. They live in remote places. Many of them are not fond of travel. And there's absolute no reason today that in most cases, 75% or more of data cannot be collected from where these patients are. Now, we cannot do at-home MRI, or we cannot do at-home complex infusions, although that's changing too. But we can do most of these things. It's only because it is inconvenient for a sponsor, for pharma, and CROs to do it. It's not happening. So we're making it happen. We're facing tremendous barriers. The only big organization that's a stakeholder here that doesn't present a barrier at all is FDA. And patients are for it. Individuals working for big organizations, pharma and biotechs, are for it. But somehow the corporate culture produced so many antibodies, and this is the reason why it's not working. So if I have a microphone, because at this rate, I don't know how many rounds we'll have, I want to give a call for action. You patients have tremendous power in Beltway, which was proven by approval of one of recent rare disease drugs. You can make it happen. I think right now the FDA is giving all kinds of incentives to companies for moving forward breakthrough science. But I would encourage all of us to petition FDA in whatever form and shape to give similar incentives to companies that are going to invest in breakthrough innovation. It's not what drug, but how you actually develop it, how patient-centric you are. It will expedite things. Right now, it's still pretty much in a white paper and think tanks phase, and we need to move it to execution stage.
I really like that last comment you made, because I think the FDA would be very open to that, because I've seen in the last 2 years and even in the last few months, they're adding incredible resources in the area of digital health. They understand the investment that's made in this space. They understand the impact for patients.
Can I make one comment just on the study design? Actually, one thing, we just finished a study on sickle cell patients, So in the study, we have in-home visits. So we collected 80% of the data through the in-home visits. So that number is large from my perspective. Yeah, and that data is available back to the clinicians within almost less than 30 minutes, basically. So you can imagine that how technology can afford. The other piece that we're doing, which I think it's fantastic, especially in a phase 2, phase 3 studies around study simulation, which is really trying to put the clinic settings in a university where we take patients and investigators and clinicians and try to simulate part of the studies. It's amazing the stuff that we found that doesn't work to your earlier point on those studies and how that helps basically before really publishing the protocol for approval, et
Try to
cetera.
help me understand. So earlier in the process,
Yes.
before the design is set, you're engaging.
During the writing of the protocol, they take certain sections, they go into a setting like NYU, New York, basically. We take clinicians and we invite investigators and patients, and they participate in the whole study simulation, how potentially it will work. And the stuff you find during this is amazing, basically. So, yeah, what
Yes.
works and doesn't work, so.
Okay. And so that kind of leads well into sort of an opening question, because all this discussion is really quite good, but I think what people in this audience want to hear about is how these digital health technologies have the potential to help patients directly. So I thought we'd kick off this question with Jen, given her experience.
Sure, happy to answer that. I think one thing that, something that the American Heart Association does and that might be quite relevant for this group is, we're very focused on new technologies, and I think Chris made just a fantastic statement in the earlier fireside chat about a publication is not enough to hand a parent. And we are learning that as scientists and leaders that we have to really push the envelope and build more collaborations. And in terms of a physician, in order to, find people in at-risk communities or those that don't have access to the best healthcare systems, to reach them with telemedicine, get the best doctor to the patients. And this was brought up earlier to, not all patients are gonna give up everything to do everything for a clinical trial. They don't have the time. They're doing a lot of other things and they can't do that. So telemedicine and technologies like this to treat patients is one example. Another example of a technology that might not come into your daily lives, but to think, you may think scientists collaborate a lot, but they don't always. They keep their data behind closed doors. They want to use it for their own purposes because it has been in the past very critical for them to succeed in their own, tracks in terms of advancing in their careers. But that tide is rapidly changing today in terms of democratizing and opening access to a lot of data. And the American Heart Association and others, like the Broad Institute and others, are really working to make this happen today. So there's more science and research available in the open domain to help with this. And hospitals are sharing, de-identified data, so all the patient identifiers are stripped from this. But think of if you had all these images of a brain and you could run those through artificial intelligence algorithms to help do better at identifying things before they happened. So that's another area of technology that is really working its way down now, to help find new scientific discoveries.
And I will say, I think that if you think getting scientists to collaborate is a challenge, and this goes to your point around getting the banks to agree that there was benefit in all of them working together. I sat in a large panel a couple of months ago, and I said, and there's an organization that was looking to help streamline contracts. So basically, all of our contracts are similar. Every time we contract with a site or an institution, they're similar. Every single one of our companies has a legal department that is massive to ensure that that process doesn't take a week or two, but takes 8 or 9 months. And so I made the absurd idea, and all the lawyers got together and just agreed on common language, right?
Yes.
Let's have one contract.
Yes.
Everybody that was on the clinical side thinks that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was on the legal side, I'm sorry if there's any attorneys in the room, we're like, that will never work.
Right.
I would argue it's because it keeps them employed. But, we have these conversations all the time. It's important to have legal frameworks that are appropriate. But I think at some point you have to say, there has to be a middle ground because, and this happened during the Ebola crisis actually in Africa, if you look at some of the statistics on what it took to get the 3 groups together to Africa to treat those patients, 3 months were lost while they negotiated the contract. And if you look at the curve and the number of people that died in those 3 months, it is unconscionable. I would argue we should have put all of the attorneys in a room in Africa and said, when you're done, you can leave, right? So But until you put it in that context, I think the legal framework is super important, but it's not as important as losing lives. So there has to be a middle ground, right?
Absolutely, Ken. I want to bring the discussion back a little bit to what you said in your introduction about, there's all this stuff that's happening behind the scenes. That's fine. We all know the political and different issues with bringing disparate groups of people together with different missions. But you mentioned about the wearables that are being used and to make it easier for the patients and their families. I want to think a little bit about, how can this help patients now? 6 to 8 years is a long time for a drug to be developed. Can these digital technologies help think about improving the quality of life of those patients while they're participating in the clinical trials? I mean, there are examples now. Michael J. Fox Foundation worked with Intel to put a wearable in a Parkinson's disease trial. A lot of children with rare diseases suffer from seizures. Is that something that can help them now?
I have a little hesitation about making a statement that participating in clinical trial with digital technology will help patients immediately in terms of their healthcare delivery, because I've been in this industry long enough to see that, again, it's our own creation, that how society decided to gather evidence that's necessary for regulatory approval. Although we think it is intertwined with clinical care, it isn't. And it's designed not to be. And try to put into the field so-called real-world clinical trial. There is, again, obstacles that you mentioned. And some of it is so nonsensical that it just makes you cry, because the same procedure that would have been done to the patient, or the same diagnostic procedure, non-invasive, that would have been done to a patient as part of healthcare, once you put it under clinical trial protocol, requires 7 months IRB approval and 7 months of lawyers' negotiations. So there is intrinsic disincentive for that to happen. So I'll be very careful about it, but let me tell you what I think, how digitizing clinical trials can help patients by getting drugs approved faster. There are two groups of benefits, and they're similar but very different. One is I call a low-hanging fruit, and in this industry, making something less expensive and faster seems like very high-hanging fruit, because the industry has been fantastic in increasing costs by 10% year on year and making process more lengthy and less productive. So that's big, but it's not big because it's easy. Its patients are going to be less inconvenienced, and you will measure things that have been measured for the last 50 years in clinical trials in a way that's more convenient and more precise and better for patients. That's easy. But the big benefit of digitizing clinical trials, including wearable devices, and whether simple provisioned or bring your own like iPhone, is increasing density of measurements, because you don't have barrier that is brick and mortar interaction. So there is unlimited number of data points that you can collect with many of these things. And our ability to craft completely new endpoints based on those measurements, which are simply impossible to design with once in 6 weeks interaction in brick and mortar. And that's a huge ticket item. And finally, the third one, which is not obvious to everybody, and that is, in fact, looping back to what you asked about, can it improve patients' lives as we speak by digitizing them in clinical trial participation, is safety. There is obvious benefit of being monitored via wearable device or other 24/7 connection vis-a-vis every 6 weeks visits. So that helps us for signal detection any individual patient, and it helps us to detect signal or trend in smaller or larger populations. These are the three benefits, and whether they help patients right away or shortening the time from 6 years to 2 years, which I think is absolutely doable in most chronic diseases, rare or not, is another matter.
But I do think, I think lowering that barrier to entry allows more patients to participate. So, what is unbelievable to me is today in an oncology trial, as an example,
Absolutely, yeah.
the average solid tumor trial in a second or third line therapy recruits somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3 patients at a site every month. That means you get one patient every 3 or 4 months. Part of the reason it takes so long to get to the numbers we need is because there are so few patients participating. Some of that is unawareness by physicians or patients, but a lot of it, again, is because those barriers to entry are so high. If we can lower the barrier to entry, if more patients can participate using mobile devices or wearable or Bluetooth devices, that certainly will increase the ability to participate. The numbers go up, the trial's done more quickly, you get to an endpoint faster.
But this is where technology can help, right? Because you got to think about the biggest challenge is how do you inform patients about these studies that are available for them? And a lot of times your physician is busy with his day in and out, checking patients, not going out to see clinical trials. So this is where we think with electronic health records, potentially with a matching algorithm to some of the clinical trials. And we worked actually across the industry on what we call patient to trial API that enables us to look at those matching algorithms and potentially make them available in an EMR system or other means. And there's other, and I think that's where we need to become creative in terms how to introduce the physicians in terms what's happening out there and potential other alternative approaches basically to this.
I think a lot of that's just it's overwhelming amount of information that's out there now that they're not used to having. And like Tomasz was saying, now we have an incredible amount of longitudinal data that's available. So how do we make that data readily accessible to the clinician? They're not used to looking at a graph of data, say, versus points in time.
There's one thing we're doing, let me just add one more thing, that within the Transfer Relate, it's a cross-industry initiative, what we call the Common Protocol Template. So the approach we're trying within across pharma to use with the same template, so when the regulatory agency looks at it, they're seeing the same thing coming from all pharmas rather than having to figure different languages across the board. As well as when we engage patients in the conversation and investigators and all the stakeholders and the clinician, they're coming into this common language, common per therapeutic area, so it makes it hopefully easier for them to all to be on the same page. That's one area I think that as an industry we can definitely make happen. So
I think it's happening from all sides. It's happening from the pharma side, the American Heart Association and other small foundations, rare disease foundations are enabling these direct-to-patient recruitment networks so individuals can sign up, they can get data back about their daily life choices, and it's not giving so much as the foundation is giving back to the individuals, and then you have the ability to recontact those individuals about clinical trials. So it doesn't come through your physician all the time, it comes through your trusted foundation that you're also getting information back from. So I think it's going to start coming through multiple channels that's funneled in a way that the consumer wants to see it. And we bring in patient advocates, we bring in patient ambassadors to help us work through these issues and tell us what they want to see and how they want to see it and when they want to engage with us and how it should work. And that's been one of the best learning opportunities for us.
I think, though, to your point, when you think about the rare community and artificial intelligence and clinical trial matching, as we get better at combining the whole genome sequencing and that data with the phenotypes and the medical information, the EHR, and that ability to overlay AI, artificial intelligence, and computerized learning to read all of those pieces and put them together. The reality is most of your physicians don't have the time to do the voluminous amount of research required and reading required to keep up with any one of the diseases in this room. there is the ability for computer technology and artificial intelligence today to do that. And so that ability to connect all of those dots and to have more of the patients have their whole genome sequenced when we know it's a genetically defined disorder, and then connecting those patients with the right physician, and then using wearable and Bluetooth and mobile technology to allow that patient who might be a continent away to connect with that physician and then have 70 or 80% of that data collected and pushed to that physician. That can all be done today. And all of the barriers that keep that from happening are people and processes we have created internally.
Yes.
Yes, and actually you bring up, this is actually the topic of the summit that I'm holding in San Francisco this fall on technology for precision health, that we basically have all this many different types of disparate data sort of coming into this funnel. The bottom of that funnel, you have the physician and the patient that are receiving this data, and so how are we able to help them assimilate that data quickly and turn it into clinical action? So those technologies are being developed, but again, I think at the core of it, some of the people issues. What do you think are the other barriers for really bringing these technologies to patients?
This is our daily trial and error. So I, over the past few years, group it into three. I like to group things in triads because that's what most people can remember. And it gets down to culture, expertise, and experience. So in terms of, quote unquote, selling the concept of digitizing clinical trial to big pharma. And your exception, so I'm not addressing, don't take it personally.
An outlier.
An average employee of your 120,000 people company does not understand what's inside the iPhone, although he or she is using it. And I'm not suggesting that everybody gets a degree in engineering, but you have to have fundamental understanding and appreciation that iPhone is not a phone any longer. And the young people usually understand it because they never use it as a phone anyway. So this, I call this expertise. These people are scientists, pharmacists, or operational managers. They don't have natural curiosity to go beyond their area of expertise. And because learning that requires time, investment, and is not supported internally because it's a waste of time. That's just a simple example. So that's expertise. Big pharma doesn't have expertise to make technology-drive clinical trials, period. There are technology organizations that do, and you know who they are, and if this industry doesn't wake up, they will eat our lunch because they can move there and do it quickly. The second is experience, which is this industry is heavily based on the notion it has never been done before. And what the regulators will say. Have you asked? No. Why? Because it has never been done before. So there is a lot of this inbreeding and lack of leadership push to do new things because you are not rewarded for failure for right reason in big corporations. You're not penalized for failing the way that others failed. And the third, which combines all this, is culture. This is the culture which is complacent, and it takes 12 years to develop drug, then it takes 12 years to develop drugs. This is what we do. And then it is a fertile ground for lawyers to sit 7 months on a contract because it doesn't matter, it's 12 years anyway. So I think there are three groups. Again, culture, experience, expertise. On all the three, I give pharma, on scale from 0 being miserable to 5, I give 1. So, and until that changes, we're not going to see an improvement on the scale that we want to see.
So Tomasz, I think we all agree on some levels of complacency that happen with any very large organizations. We do have the benefit of someone here who is an outlier. One of the things that I've called for in the Technology for Precision Health Summit is leadership from the medical community. So we have Dr. Laura Esserman leading, a breast cancer surgeon who's really spearheaded early diagnosis and treatment of cancer. We need that leadership from the medical community, and that's not going to come from the broad masses. I don't think it ever has in any environment. But I do want to make note for the audience, we're running a little short on time. We would love to take any questions from the audience. We have a lot of deep expertise here. I hope she's going toward the mic. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Patricia Wood, and I'm a president of a nonprofit for an ultra-rare disease. And one of our leading NBI investigators has a promising compound that she hopes to go to clinical trial within the next year. And her idea is she started a nonprofit to take money to cover this cost of this trial, and she wants the families to be able to do it from home, at least in their city. And it has 3 identified biomarkers, so there is something that could be measured digitally. And my question is, do you think this is feasible to do, not 5 years from now, but within the next year, that families wouldn't have to travel? They could do it from home or maybe in cooperation with their clinicians in their city?
I can answer very quickly. Technology will not be the obstacle here. It can be done today, and depends, of course, if there is a gut biopsy, for example, required, you can't do it remotely. You have to go somewhere and somebody has to stick the scope and take the biopsy. Cannot do it remotely yet, although I think it will happen eventually. So that type of thing cannot be digitized today, but anything that is done without violating patient's body, except blood draw, which can be done at home, can be. So technology is not an obstacle. In drug development like that, when it's, I understand, new chemical entity, not repurposed drug, the barrier to entry is something that has nothing to do with technology. It's simply being able to prove that to regulators who have to approve it, and for an absolutely good reason, and to physicians who will be administering it, and to a company like ours who will be actually running this trial, or CANS, that this is a reasonable risk to take, because there is a benefit-risk ratio that cannot be exceeded and differs obviously depending on the severity of this particular situation. But that's what you have to have as a package. Technology is ready to take it, and you have to first figure out whether this drug is reasonably safe to go into human trials.
And and to your point as well, we're doing trials today with all of these things in place, so it absolutely could be done.
And the FDA would approve something like that?
And again, we can't speak for FDA in specifics, but broadly, we have approval from the FDA to run a trial, phase 3 trial with new chemical entity, where 80% of patients will be monitored entirely from home, A to Z, consent, screening, first visit, 10 visits in between, and last visit. So FDA will most likely be very open to it, but again, it depends on specifics. You have to be
I would say you need to have the conversation with the FDA now. Like, if this is what you want to do, go to the FDA now and have the conversation. And they are a good listener. I know when we did the remote study 5 years ago, when we basically shipped drugs to homes and what have you, that was like, at the time, when we started the idea, people said there's no way you can do that. And we went to the FDA, they agreed, and we worked together. Yes, it wasn't successful, but we learned a lot, that we're doing things in what we call a hybrid model, basically. Yeah. So, but the conversation is important with the FDA.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's very encouraging.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank our panelists one more time. We didn't get to hear about blockchain, so I think we're going to have to do this panel again next year, and we're going to get the update from Munther on what's happening with blockchain at Pfizer, or wherever his next step is. So let's thank everyone again.
Thanks.